Welcome, everyone. Good to see participants trickling in. Welcome, welcome. We'll get started in a few minutes. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for being here. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, welcome. Thank you for joining. And if the person on the phone, if you're not driving and it's safe, if you identify yourself, the person with 6542, I can update your username so people know who you are. If it's safe to unmute and tell me who you are, I can do that. Welcome, everyone. We'll get started in a few minutes here. And I'm being reminded that as a webinar attendee, you can't unmute the person with the phone number. So at a minimum, we'll make sure that people are describing what they see on the screen. So forgive me for forgetting what platform I'm on. Welcome, everyone. We'll start in a moment, but Josh, can I just make sure that your camera and your sound is working okay? Thank you for being here.
Is that sounding okay?
That sounds great. We can see you, we can hear you, so all is well.
Great.
Well, it's 1:31, so I think we could get started with this. This is being recorded, so if anyone drops in a little bit late, they can watch it themselves. So welcome, everyone, to the February 27th public webinar focusing on emerging resources. So kind of the two buckets today are small modular nuclear, as well as two kinds of alternative fuels. You can go to the next slide, please. So on the technical side, we are using the Q&A feature. So if you are a participant and want to ask a question, you may do so using that Q&A feature. We're going to kind of create stacks of questions, and then I'll read those aloud, and the presenter will have a chance to answer those, backed up by PSE staff if needed. Some questions are hard to answer on the spot, but that's why there is a feedback form process, and so anything not answered live will be answered in writing, and that document is ready in about 2 weeks after today's meeting. If closed captions help you follow what's on the screen, you can click that. And then the raised hand feature will be off for the majority of the meeting, but at the end, when it's public comment time, we'll turn that on. Anyone wanting to make a public comment can raise your hand, we'll call on you. The chat is a way for us as the host of the meeting to send any information or links as needed. It's not really a two-way communication between different participants. Next slide, please. So my request as a facilitator, just, be constructive and courteous. Know that my job is to guide the process and keep things moving and answer your questions as best we can, but also get through all the content. These public webinars are designed to be kind of an expansive way of reaching PSE customers and the public. So watch your acronyms and all that. Not everything is going to be able to be hashed out during this webinar format. And so there is that feedback form or email, which is irp@pse.com, if you want to provide additional input. So Pauline, can you just put those two links in the chat? That would be great. Thank you. And we got a lot to cover, so let's focus on the presentation, and those public comments where we get to hear your voice will happen at the end. Next slide. So a safety moment, as you know, this is how PSE starts all of its meetings. This is a call before you dig safety moment. So call 811 before digging, and 811 will notify utilities to mark your lines, and you can find more at digsafewa.org. I'd like to tell that to my neighbor who I'm watching dig right now, but I will focus on this meeting instead. Next slide, please. Okay, so today's speakers. First up, we have Josh Jacobs, which you know is the Vice President of Clean Energy Strategy and Planning, and it's a real delight to have you here to open us up. Chris with PSE will provide some additional information. We have Nathan Clark with Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, PNNL, and then Mike and Thor will also provide additional information on the PSE side. We can let them introduce themselves in a little bit more detail when they get going. Next slide, please. So the idea is to talk about advanced nuclear technology today, to provide that overview for you all as PSC stakeholders and customers, as well as talk about renewable diesel and renewable natural gas. These two topics, renewable diesel, natural gas, as well as nuclear technology, kind of fall under the umbrella of CEIP approved, which is acronyms, Clean Energy Implementation Plan, approved renewable technologies or resources. So that's why we've kind of bundled them today together to make it one webinar. And so then the bigger question is, how do these emerging technologies support PSE's clean energy goals? And we'll get into that. Next slide. So many of you are familiar with this spectrum of public participation. It talks about what the agency or host is really committing to the public. These webinars, like I said, are designed for anyone to join, and it's a chance to learn. So they're kind of more on the informed level, but you all as PSC stakeholders have every ability to provide feedback, to provide that information or recommendations or concerns via that feedback form. So just because today there's not going to be a lot of polling or back and forth dialogue doesn't mean that you can't submit kind of additional comments for PSC to consider via those forms. And I'll note that there's a parallel resource planning advisory group, and that technical advisory group does get a synopsis of what you all as public stakeholders share. So next slide, please. Our agenda today, we're together for an hour and a half. We're going to start with Josh and head into an intro about advanced nuclear, do a little bit of a deeper dive in advanced nuclear technology, and then shift gears and talk about alternative fuels for the last, about 40 minutes of the meeting and end with public comment. So a lot of good content today. Next slide, please. Okay, well, with that, I want to turn it over to Josh to provide some opening remarks. Go ahead.
Thanks, Sophie. If you don't want to go to the next slide. First of all, I just want to thank everybody for spending a little bit of time with us this afternoon. It's not lost on me how much engagement is required to kind of track all of the different work that's happening from a resource planning perspective here at PSE. And so really just want to say thank you for spending some time with us as we talk through some of the emerging technologies that we're exploring here at Puget Sound Energy. Back in 2021, we filed our first integrated resource plan that incorporated the requirements of CETA. And that was really the first time that we started to unpack some of the defined terms like renewable resource or non-emitting electric generation into our planning process. And if you know anything about our current generation portfolio mix, you know that we do have carbon emitting resources in our portfolio today, like coal and natural gas. And really the challenge that's in front of us as a utility and really as a state is to find pathways for us to reduce our carbon footprint, continue to find emerging technologies that support resources that we know will have a part to play in our portfolio, like wind, solar, and storage. If you want to go to the next slide. So if you're on this call, I'm sure you're familiar with some of the key milestone dates that we're targeting as part of our planning process. Three big ones that we talk a lot about: being coal-free by 2025, being 80% clean or carbon neutral by 2030, and then 100% clean by 2045. And really what we're showing here on the right is the magnitude of the clean resources or the clean megawatt hours that we'll need to bring to the system to meet our growing demand and help us find a pathway through our current portfolio that includes carbon emitting resources. And you can see by 2030, we need over 6 million megawatt hours of carbon-free resources. And by 2045, that number grows to over 16 million. So it is a massive transformation that's in front of us. And really what we're talking about here on this slide is just the clean energy resources to meet CETA. But really the challenge that we struggle with as we try to find pathways forward here is how do we complement the wind, solar, and storage that we know will be part of our portfolio of the future with dispatchable resources that can help us both integrate these intermittent resources and backstop our system reliability during either extreme heat events or extreme cold events. And you don't have to go back very far in history where we just recently set peak loads in January, and I'm sure you're all familiar with how cold it got in the middle of January. But really what we're trying to identify is how do we find a complementary set of resources that help us meet our customer needs across all system conditions. Next slide. And so as we think about emerging technologies and the pathway forward with dispatchable technologies, there's really three areas that we've been focusing: alternative fuels like green hydrogen and renewable natural gas or renewable diesel, small scale nuclear, and long duration storage. And so today we're going to unpack a little bit about the nuclear work that we've been focused on and some of the concepts around renewable diesel and renewable natural gas. And we hope that you'll stick with us as we continue the series into April and really begin to explore some of the alternatives and product offerings around long duration storage. So with that, Sophie, I'll pass it back to you. And again, thank you for joining us today. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Well, thank you for opening us up, Josh. Appreciate that. You can go to the next slide, please, Will. So next we have Chris Drumnicki, who's going to provide some information about advanced nuclear if you are like me and really don't have a grounding in it. So this is kind of your 101. So please take it away, Chris.
Thanks, Sophie. And good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chris Drumnicki, and I'm an emerging tech development manager at PSE. And I'm going to basically provide some very brief introductory comments. I just have the one slide, so you can go to that slide. Before handing things over to Nathan Clark from Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. And as Josh mentioned, PSE is taking an all of the above approach, if you will, to actively exploring emerging technologies in order to meet our customers' electricity needs and state emissions requirements. And it's likely there's no single solution to ensuring a stable, on-demand supply of carbon-free electricity for our customers, and a number of new technologies will need to emerge for us to achieve Washington State's goal of 100% carbon-free electricity by 2045. And we are committed to understanding all resource opportunities and pursuing what makes the most sense for our customers. So today, nuclear energy represents less than 1% of PSE's electricity fuel mix, but that may change in the future. So new nuclear technologies, including small modular reactors or SMRs, or sometimes referred to as advanced modular reactors, are approaching commercial readiness, and PSE is monitoring developments as SMR technology matures. SMRs appear to be a promising technology that have the potential to provide carbon-free, baseload, and on-demand electricity, and are a qualifying clean energy resource under the Clean Energy Transformation Act, or CETA, and can complement our growing portfolio of renewables. In short, SMRs may be able to fill in the gaps in the energy supply when resources like wind or solar are not performing optimally, so that the grid remains in balance and customers do not experience any disruptions. Now, you may have heard of PSE's early funding agreement that we have with Energy Northwest. And for some brief context, Energy Northwest is a joint operating agency formed by the Washington State Legislature back in 1957. And Energy Northwest is owned by a consortium of 28 public utility districts and municipalities across the state. Energy Northwest owns and operates 4 electricity generating facilities, including the Columbia Generating Station, which is the Northwest's only commercial nuclear energy facility and is the 3rd largest electricity generator in Washington state. Now, Energy Northwest is proposing to develop and operate a 4-unit small modular reactor facility producing a total of approximately 308 megawatts. The first reactor unit is anticipated to be in commercial operation in 2030, with the other remaining 3 units coming to operation by the end of 2031. So now, as part of our all of the above approach, PSE is investing that $10 million with Energy Northwest to support early project development activities for the first phase of this proposed SMR nuclear facility in exchange for PSE receiving future energy offtake. Now, importantly, through its balanced and prudent investment strategy, PSE is mitigating risk and it does not incur future obligations by providing this $10 million in funding. So that concludes my very brief comments. I'm now going to turn things over to Nathan Clark from Pacific Northwest National Laboratory to provide an overview of advanced modular reactors. And I'll let Nathan introduce himself, but he's an expert in nuclear, and we are very grateful he can join us today.
That's great. Chris, before Nathan gets going, we have some questions in the chat that I think we can answer in the Q&A. The first, for those of you on the phone who can't watch the back and forth, a few of you had thoughts or concerns about that informed level of participation, and PSE noted that they're listening and open for feedback and writing from any of you. So that's one piece there. And then, and then the other piece is, let me fill this out, look at this here. The question about, can you go back to slide 11, please? Perfect, Will, thank you. A question was asked, were the energy sources on this slide only PSE owned sources? Can someone from PSE jump in and answer? Maybe Philip, are you online, or Elizabeth?
I'm sorry, this is Philip Popoff. Sophie, you're echoing quite a bit. I don't know if I'm echoing. This represents the resources that we own or have under contract. So we don't necessarily own them all, but it includes hydro contracts. It includes wind contracts as well.
Philip, am I still echoing?
Yes.
Okay. I'll work on that offline. I'm not sure what's going on. But in any case, thank you for answering that question, and I'll figure out those pieces. And then otherwise, let's turn it over to Nathan, because one more question. Yeah, let's turn it over to Nathan. And I'll work on my echo.
All right, is this audio going to work? Working for me? I'm assuming
I've got you, Nathan.
Yes.
Great. Thank you. All right, my name is Nathan Clark. I appreciate the opportunity from Puget Sound and the team and the intro. I work for Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. I have around 18 years experience in nuclear power commercially, as well as in the Navy. I also worked with Energy Northwest for a number of years at Columbia Generating Station, and been at Pacific Northwest National Laboratory for a little over a year, helping the Army's nuclear program. I have Ali Zabib as well. So Ali, why don't you take a moment and introduce yourself too?
Sure, thank you, Nathan. So Ali Zabib, I am Pacific Northwest National Laboratory's Nuclear Industry Program Management, my manager. My primary role is industry engagement and building relationships on behalf of the National Laboratory with the industry partners. At a general overview of PNNL, PNNL is one of DOE's 17 national laboratories. It's a laboratory that supports the Department of Energy's and the nation's with complex challenges in the areas of energy, clean energy, and national security questions. We're located in Eastern Washington. In Richland is where our main campus is, with a total staff of about 5,600, but we also have satellite campuses in Seattle, Portland, and Washington, D.C. We're happy to be with Nathan here today and presenting and answering your questions. Thanks.
Yeah, and Puget Sound, thankfully, reached out to us, I think looking for an objective voice. So Pacific Northwest National Laboratory doesn't promote or support any one technology or technology provider. In fact, my boss is the wind energy program manager. So we're a firm believer in providing the nation the best resources to provide power and most reliably and efficiently as possible. So we'll give an objective view. The objective of the meeting is and the presentation is really to give a brief overview of advanced nuclear, talk about some of the benefits of the new technologies, and then maybe how it fits into the Pacific Northwest region. Next slide. We'll start with the question, what is an advanced reactor? And well, I think it's best approached looking at the sizing. So first, the middle, small modular reactors, as Chris mentioned, SMRs are kind of the buzzword nowadays. The current fleet of reactors are all large light water reactors. They would fall on that far right side. So the newer technologies are primarily focused on this mid region. We'll say 20 to 300, but that number is nowhere set in stone. So when you say SMRs, advanced reactors is a little bit broader. In fact, the new Vogtle plants that just came online in Georgia are considered advanced reactors because they are an evolution step ahead of the current light water reactor fleet that was mostly constructed 60s, 70s, and 80s. And then you have micro reactors as well, which most people consider a type of small modular reactor, although they have the deployable and military aspect to them as well. Next slide. I think talking about nuclear power, it's always nice to have a little refresher. So what is nuclear? Nuclear fission is the splitting of atoms. So the uranium atom gets bombarded with the neutron and splits, and the energy of those two the separation of the nucleus is what produces the heat inside the fuel. And we use that heat to create steam for the most part. We can use it to do other things as well. Light water reactor fuel is shown there on the right, a fuel assembly. There's between 600 and 800 fuel assemblies in any given core, and you can see the rods and the fuel pellets within that within the assembly. Uranium fuel, enrichment between 3 and 5% for most commercial reactors. When we say enrichment, that just means the amount of U-235, the uranium-235 isotope that is available. The systems of a reactor are an important part as well. So down below in the left, you see the pressurized water reactor system with the primary coolant in red and the secondary coolant, which is where you create your steam, turn your turbine, and produce power through the generator. And then every nuclear power plant has a cooling water system, which is shown on the far right, the darker blue, which typically comes from a lake or a pond or a river or the ocean. In every power plant design, whether you're talking the current fleet or these new advanced reactors, you have elements of safety. The main elements being controlling the reactivity, the fission reaction, removing the heat from the core, and also providing barriers between the fuel, the radioactive particles, and the public and workers as well. All right, next slide. And just FYI, we'll stop in a couple slides. I'll give a chance for questions. after we talk through nuclear and before I go into the benefits of the new advanced reactors, I'll have some time for questions. So
Nathan, can I just jump in?
Yeah.
Can I just jump in and see if my audio issue is fixed so that I can moderate those?
Sounds good to me.
I'm echoing. Okay, great.
No,
so when you pause,
it sounds good. You're not echoing to me.
beautiful. Well, when we get to the question, I just want to let all participants know, thank you for your patience with the stack of questions that have built up. When you pause next, Nathan, we're going to take a little bit of a longer break to resolve those. So go ahead.
Yeah, no problem. Nuclear has evolved over since the 70s and 80s. So the light water reactors and what is currently installed would be considered generation 2. So Vogtle 3 and 4 have more advanced features. Those are the AP1000s. Those would be considered a generation 3. So from generation 3 on, those are all advanced reactors, even if they are larger reactors. The NuScale design took that light water reactor, but evolved it into even more simplified and passive and safe systems. Generally, though, when people talk about advanced nuclear and SMRs, they're talking about the Gen 4, so revolutionary, fail-safe fuels, much more innovative coolants, modular designs, typically smaller, but not every design. So that's where our focus is here. And you can see the 4 pictures from left. You have a current plant, Vogtle 3 on the right top, NuScale, Voyager on the bottom left, and then a Westinghouse eVinci microreactor on the bottom. Next slide. So what's driving the need? Do we need these? Well, the answer is yes. And the need for nuclear power is really driven by, if you look at what we did in the 70s and 80s, we had a need ramp that was looking extremely steep. And so that ramp, as we know, slowed down. The power needs of aluminum smelting and another industry slowed, but that power need is catching up to our society. And you can find that in many studies, including the discussion Josh had at the beginning. Carbon-free power laws were mentioned. We need resilient energy grids. We need the ability to balance load with renewables and have a firm, reliable generation source. Island mode is a big thing as well. There's a lot of big tech companies that want to be able to operate seamlessly, data centers or storage, data storage centers. Add into that similar concept of black start, where you can start your plant without any outside power. And then we mentioned also that renewables, they definitely have their place, and they can only take us so far. There's a picture there too of the XE100 X Energy high temperature gas plant. All right, next slide. So the next question would then be, what are the holdups in new advanced? Capital cost has to be talked about first. Capital cost is significant for advanced reactors. I put the little caveat on the end there of if you want something robust, it comes with the cost. And so, it's a balance in our society. Should we wait for big reliability issues to happen on our grid and then count the cost, or do we invest now? The other holdup is the capacity of advanced reactors. It isn't always a fair comparison to renewables in terms of when they're available. You also have the challenge with SMRs that they're long-term plants. When you're really marrying into a 60 to 100 year plant, so the cost modeling is very challenging on the SMRs. Most other technologies aren't looking out that far. So how do you project 60 to 100 years out? Action plans around the country really favor, what can we build now, 2, 3, 5, 10 years out that will become available soon. Our country hasn't built large thermal generation in a long time. That's another thing with our supply chain and workers and whatnot. And then, of course, we need to reach out and educate and help the public's perception. Part of why we're here today. All right, next slide. So just some quick positives and negatives to current nuclear power. You have high capacity, very little refueling, good reliability. We mentioned the carbon-free, firm power. The negatives are mostly being addressed with the newer designs. The high water consumption, radioactive waste, the exclusion zones, high investment costs, and less agile. Although the radioactive waste, if you look at the picture down there below of San Onofre Nuclear Generating Station on the coast, that is all the fuel from operation over the course of 30, 40, 50 years. So it's a negative, but it's also manageable. I'll stop here for questions. Sounds like we have some.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Nathan, and thanks everyone for bearing with me here. So I want to start, rewind ourselves back. Fred asked a question, and you might have to back up a few slides, Will, but I'll let you know. Fred asked, is the nuclear that is less than 1% of PSE supply actually identifiable as such, or is it part of a general market transaction? Philip, Kara, can someone jump in and answer that question? Or we can answer it in writing if you don't know the answer offhand. Feel free to come off and mute.
We were going to have Elizabeth come on, so she'll be available as well in a little bit. But yeah, that's essentially part of the market purchases kind of thing. So from unspecified market purchases, we don't have a contract with them.
Great. So we can see when Elizabeth joins. Let's see. I think we're waiting for a moment. The other question, which if Elizabeth isn't here, Philip, you can note or just say we'll send it to the feedback form. What specifically are PSE's future energy offtake rights associated with the $10 million investment? What does that involve?
I think it'd be better for us to respond to that in the feedback report to make sure that I get it just right. I'm sure I could be 90% accurate, but let's be 100% accurate.
Let's be 100%. Okay, very good. And Don, I noticed you asked a number of questions. PSE is trying to determine which they have answers to live versus which they need to kind of discuss in writing. So just stay tuned with those. And then let's do 2 more slides, 1 or 2 more slides, and then we'll get to, there's another small stack of questions here. A small stack of questions here that we can perhaps address live. So go ahead, Nathan, and we'll pause again soon.
Okay, that sounds good. Thanks, Sophie. The nuclear industry really prides itself on lessons learned and continuous improvement. And so, the challenges we face, and there are many, the costs, the accidents, Fukushima and others, responding to those challenges, improving the technology, really building a robust technology is where this is all headed. So these next 3 slides are the benefits of the new Generation 4 reactors. Next slide, please. So we'll talk about the smaller size first. When you go small, you can modularize components, which is a big construction cost on site. Number of welds should fall significantly with newer designs where they're factory built, shipped on site. As such, you can scale your design. So build one, as in the new scale and X Energy designs, you can build one and then add on more as you go and as your needs grow. They're built underground because of their smaller footprint, which improves the safety and visibility and exposure. But those last 2 are really the big ones. The footprints and exclusion zones are dramatically smaller. So the worst case accident in some of these newer designs could put you at the fence line. You're completely safe from any radiation dose, as opposed to the older designs having larger footprints. Next slide. Next benefit is the versatility, and there's a picture of the TerraPower Natrium reactor, which has some really unique versatility components to it. So flexible operation, load following capability, so the ability to follow your demand on the grid. The improved ramp rates as well. The older light water reactor designs, maybe you had 2 to 5% per hour. Now you're looking at minutes being able to respond to changes on the grid. We mentioned black start and island mode already. Shorter refueling or online refueling in some of the designs. Less water usage. We're looking at a design that was 100 times less water usage or more, up to 1,000 times less water usage, with a little hit in efficiency. But and that overall, you have, with all these advantages, gives you more places you can put this, right? You don't have a 1,000 acres you have to carve out to be able to put these newer designs. Next slide. And the last benefit we'll talk about is just the revolutionary design. So primarily in the fuel, where a lot of the newer designs have a higher enrichment, which means you use more of the fuel. The fuel is self-contained, non-meltable. So the worst case scenario accident with, for example, the triso fuel keeps the fuel intact, and it can heat up to extremely high temperatures. But these little kernels you see in the top right picture, top left picture, are uranium covered in silicon carbide and other layering to give it extremely high heat, be able to withstand extremely high heats. I talked about the shorter refueling. Coolants as well, though. So when you use different coolants other than water, you have the ability to get higher temperatures and lower pressures. So better efficiency, simpler containment. In the case of liquid metals, most of these don't have any pressure vessel, which is a high cost. And so, and also the other coolants give you less reactive and less corrosive components as opposed to water. Now, all this being said, I have to say we talk a lot about the differences between light water reactor and the new fuel designs. We're not saying the light water reactor fuels and plants are unsafe. We're just we're getting better, right? We're improving and making them more efficient. That last line is in particular fewer backup cooling systems. By having these new designs, non-meltable fuel, you don't have to install 5 or 10 different backup and redundant cooling systems because of the robust fuel and coolants. Okay, maybe we should stop there, Sophie.
Yeah, let's stop there. So there are some questions that I think can be geared a little bit towards PSE, and then there are some that we'll direct towards you, Nathan, and Ali. So can you go back to slide 20, Will? Beautiful. All right, so Don writes, we agree that reliability is super important. My neighborhood, about 15,000 customers, just endured a 3-hour power outage this morning. That has a cost. But our small modular reactor SMR is really the only way and the most cost-effective way to deliver reliability. What about batteries and other alternatives? We need to understand the big picture. Can someone from PSE jump in? I know, Philip, is that you? Go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, I'll jump in there. SMR would probably not have helped you in your neighborhood this morning. But the reason why we're looking at SMR is we need a form of generation that is non-emitting, that is reliable. We just went through a cold snap in January where there was no wind for days in a row. So there would have been, we may not have been able to charge batteries even if we had a pile of batteries. So as we get deeper and deeper into getting to 100% non-emitting energy, we need something. It has to be SMRs. It has to be something. Well, it doesn't have to be SMR. It has to be something like an SMR. It has to be something like a geothermal that is widespread. We need some way of generating reliable energy, not just to meet the loads, also to meet off-peak, so that we can meet the demand for charging all of the energy storage it's going to be that we're going to be pursuing in the future. So that's basically the reason why we're looking at these technologies. They're not the only ones that we're looking at. They're the only ones we're talking about today. So we are having a Black and Veatch do a report looking at a lot of different kinds of emerging resources. We just wanted to bring out some of these today, and especially the nuclear the small modular reactor. The technology is very, very different from what people what they know about the older plants. This is a very different technology, so we thought it would be helpful to do some of that. So, did that cover all of those questions, Sophie?
I think so for those stacks over there.
Oh, and also I would just say, keep in mind, we're not saying we're going to run out and build these. We're saying this is the first step in an IRP process to look at that and say, is this in the ballpark of reasonableness? Right? Compared when you put wind, which isn't wind plus batteries isn't going to be as helpful as something that is dispatchable, that's firm, that you know can be there even under low hydro conditions, even under low wind conditions, even in the clouds. So we're examining whether this is even in the ballpark of reasonableness for additional study.
Thanks, Philip. You might be off the hook and you might not be, but I just want to build upon what you were saying, because I want to recognize that Don asked a number of questions on slide 14. The first has to do with kind of the all options approach to energy planning, which Philip, you just touched on right now. And I just want to request, Meredith, I know that the PSE discussed new emerging resource options at the January 12th Resource Planning Advisory Group meeting. And that feedback will be discussed at the March 25th meeting. So Meredith, if you could just put in the chat any of the materials from that January 12th meeting, just to start answering what Don asked about, what are the all of the above options there. And the other three questions, Don, that you had as well, PSE will answer via the feedback form, because some of it requires a little bit more thinking on their part. The other question directed at PSE is PSE focused on one of the proprietary nuclear technologies that Nathan mentioned? Is that a you question, or Chris? And if we don't know right now, we can come back to it. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I can share. Go ahead, Philip.
Oh, go ahead. No, Chris, you go right ahead.
I was just going to say that Energy Northwest has a joint development agreement with X Energy, and they use the XE100 reactor. So certainly that's PSE's provided $10 million of funding to Energy Northwest. And with that in mind, the XE100 has kind of been our main focus. But that said, that does not necessarily mean definitively that will be the technology utilized. So it is anticipated at this point, but PSE is, I would say, more broadly focused.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Chris. Nathan and Ali, maybe if you want to come on camera too, maybe you are and you're just not on my screen, but there's a few questions that are directed to you, but if you don't know the answers on the spot, we can record them. We have Emily here taking good notes, and we can you can help answer them, after the meeting. So the first question that might be good in your court here is, how have the radioactive waste risks been addressed as manageable when sites remain the long-term storage site and the fuel for this reactor design prevents additional proliferation risk due to being close to weapons grade? Thoughts on that question, Nathan or Ali?
Ali, you want to go ahead?
Go ahead, Nathan.
The waste issue is a good question, and it's a good challenge to the industry. I just want to clarify, the higher enrichments does not get these anywhere close to weapons grade enrichment. But this same challenges exist for advanced reactors as we have for light water reactors, which is store the waste on site, and it is compact. And like Columbia Generating Station's been operating since 1984, and I could walk around all the waste in a matter of 2 minutes. You can see it right there on the pad, and it's but it is we're being held up by our Department of Energy, and but they still have they still have it in their court to take the fuel someday. I don't know, Ali.
No, this is definitely a challenge. The reality that we don't have a permanent storage for waste, and the shutdown of the Yakima Mountain did not make things much easier. But there are steps that the Department of Energy is taken, including initiating a consent-based siting a process for an interim storage facility that is ongoing. That is something that the Department of Energy realizes has responsibility in delivering on, and we don't have the answers there quite yet, but it is a process that is ongoing within the Department of Energy, and PNNL is one of many national labs that continues to dedicate a lot of its research towards continued safe storage of both waste for the existing fleet, but also future reactors. And we and others are developing and continue to develop safe storage solutions for the light water reactor fuel, as well as the advanced fuel forms that are going to fuel the next generation of reactors.
Thanks for that. Next up, we have a question from Joel. Joel asks, how confident is PNNL in a 60 to 100 year lifespan for SMRs? So slide 20, Will, can you jump to slide 20? It seems like a wide range that has significant implications for levelized costs. Nathan, Ali, any thoughts?
I can start, Nathan, if you'd like me to. Okay. Yeah, so the basis for the number that Nathan shared is actually our experience with the existing fleet. The existing fleet, started off with a 40-year license and pursued successful. Many of them did pursue successfully a license renewal or license extension for 20 years. And in fact, some are embarking on a subsequent license renewal that extends their operation for an additional 20 years. And a lot of that work is actually all of it is done in coordination with the NRC and very strict safety basis and research that is done by many of the national labs, including PNNL, that looks at aging management programs of these reactors, the performance of material under continued exposure to radiation and heat. And it's that basis and that research that we've collected over many decades that has allowed us to extend the life of the cores of the existing fleet with appropriate maintenance, with appropriate refurbishment, so on and so forth. And materials technology is only getting better, and we continue to learn from what we've gathered in the past decades. And that is the basis for a lot of the designs that the next generation of reactors are working on. The light water reactors will operate in similar radiation and temperature conditions as the existing fleet, and we have established materials and well understood material operating conditions for those designs. But also the Gen 4, the next generation of reactors, have also operated as research reactors or commercial reactors in the US and overseas. And we have a lot of data on that material and a lot of good understanding of its operation, and therefore can confidently say that these reactors will operate in the range of 60 to 100 years.
Thank you for that. So let's see, another question here, and we're going to focus on the questions directed to PNNL because we have them here, and some of the questions that might tie more to things PSE can answer on its own time. We might defer to that because we're actually at time for this first agenda item. So the question for PNNL, how can this safety be proven to a customer base that is strongly against nuclear energy? Anything that you would add from what you've already talked about today? And if you don't have an addition, that's okay. We can, go ahead.
Yeah, the safety of nuclear. Well, nuclear does have an excellent track record as far as personnel and facility safety. The events that have happened have learnings from them, and the industry has incorporated them, and in my opinion, very appropriately, and we'll continue to do so.
Thanks for that. I'm going to just move us quickly through these, knowing that there's a lot in the queue. So another question is, how can the assurances about exclusion zone at the fence and no radiation risk when this is an unproven, untested design, and that HALEU, forgive my pronunciation, fuel again, poses a unique proliferation risk requiring maximum security? Any other thoughts on that, Nathan or Ali?
Well, again, the HALEU fuel is 5 to 20% enrichment. It's not a class above the current fuel. I'm pretty sure that's true. So we're not talking weapons grade. It won't require any additional security or proliferation risks that we already take on with the current fuels. As far as the safety, can you maybe repeat that first part?
Oh, sure. It just says that poses a unique proliferation risk requiring maximum security, and saying that the exclusion zone at the fence and no radiation risk when this is an unproven, untested design. You've touched on some of this, so yeah.
The untested, unproven, I mean, it is right. These haven't been built yet, right? And so we're going off of design, but we have operating experience with, I mean, we've got for example, a high temperature gas reactor that has operated here in the US. So as far as operational experience with some of these new fuels and coolants, we're not building and experimenting on them. That research has been done. The qualification of the materials and the qualification of the systems happens beforehand, not when you build it. So
great, thank you. No, let's go. I think you have 2 more for you all, and then we'll have to carry the conversation forward. So could PNNL discuss why smaller reactors would not require the current extent for exclusion zones and procedures, and the status of NRC consideration of regulations currently or prospectively permitting as small as a 0-mile exclusion zone? You've talked a little bit about exclusion zones. Anything else to add?
I don't think so.
Okay, great. So let's go to this is slightly a different shift here. Is an SMR a good option for large industrial campuses or data centers to offload the demand? Thoughts on that one?
Absolutely. Yeah, the small modular reactors are designed as the black start and island mode type of capability to support local infrastructure, whether residential or commercial, and data centers would be a really good example of that, where you have components and equipment that can't go out of service, and so especially if you have a multi-unit station, you could preclude a lot of the reliability concerns you might have with another system.
Mm-hmm.
And another way to look at this is, oh, go ahead, sorry. Oh,
you finish, Ali, go ahead.
I was going to add that, we're in the United States, we're really very accustomed and comfortable with large reactors, primarily because of the economy of scale. You basically end up building an 1,100-1,200 megawatts electric reactor, and you basically divide that cost over that large electrical output. With small modular reactors, as Nathan keeps alluding to, it's ultimately going to be a plant that will host many of these modules, not a single one. And the cost savings there that a lot of the reactor developers are aspiring towards are really with modularization and offsite manufacturing. And so it's going to be a question of if it's going to end up being a smaller reactor, which in many cases it will be, even with a few of these modules in a given on a given site. It's basically, will the cost of modularization make up for any potential loss associated with the economies of scale? So it's an economy of modularization versus economies of scale there. And a lot of these things are risks that these reactor developers are taking, but the two demonstrations that the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program, co-funded by the Department of Energy, is trying to accomplish is answer exactly those questions. And so the Department of Energy is coming in with 50% of the cost of building those first two demonstrations to help the first two developers demonstrate a lot of concepts, including the concept of economy of modularization.
Great. So Nathan and Ali, we're going to just kind of do a lightning round for the questions that we committed to answering live. And then the rest, thank you for your patience in having us do it by the feedback form because we're over time. So this question is, could PNL discuss the current and prospective availability of HALO fuels and fuel fabrication, including TRISO, pronunciation, and other forms, on what estimated timeline and what cost relative to conventional nuclear fuel would higher safe fuels be available, and what are the upside risks on both time and cost? So either a lightning response or you can respond in writing at a later point. Seems like this is in the weeds.
I could take a quick stab at it. HALO, or high-ass halo-enriched uranium, is what Nathan referred to as fuel that is enriched up to 20% or 19.75%. That fuel and its supply chain is one of the bigger challenges for the deployment of the next generation of reactors. The Department of Energy and the reactor developers recognize this challenge, and the first two demonstrations are working very, very closely with the Department of Energy to establish that initial supply for the first two cores. But in addition to that, the developers and the Department of Energy recognize that we need to eventually establish our own supply chain for that particular fuel. And there are active projects, programs, and a request or an RFP recently that came out specifically asking conglomerates of companies in the United States to apply for funding to establish high-assay low-enriched uranium supply in the United States. So it's one of those that we recognize is a risk to the U.S. industry, but is a risk that is being actively tackled and managed by the Department of Energy and the U.S. industry.
Great. Okay. Well, knowing that we're 10 minutes over time here, and I want to make sure our colleagues get their time, there's a number of really good questions. This is a very informed audience. And so I know PSE will have its homework to respond to you all. Nathan and Ali expect some phone calls to work through some answers. And I think, did you get through your last slide, Nathan?
The last three slides I didn't cover, but it was just the status of the current projects and some of the things about the Northwest that make it unique and able to, be a partner for nuclear power, including, and you could even skip that. We've talked about most of those. But here's the regional innovators. We've mentioned most of these, including Microsoft at the end, which recently initiated a proposal to look at advanced nuclear. So lots of partners. And the last slide is probably, I can go through quickly as well, but just showing the need for power. We have the infrastructure, retiring coal, CEDA. So no, I think we're good.
Great. Good. Well, let's just jump to your last slide so people can see your information there. Very good. Nathan, Ali, thank you for being in the hot seat with all those really important questions. And for those of you who we weren't able to answer your question live, Meredith has indicated and we've recorded it for later. There's also just in the appendix to these slides, and Pauline, can you just make sure that the meeting chat includes all of the slide deck links and the agenda links? This slide deck has an appendix that includes additional information from Nathan and Ali in case you're one of those people who can really go deep. So with that, thank you, Nathan and Ali. You're welcome to stay on for the rest of the meeting, but you can go off camera and we can go to the next slide.
Very good, thank you.
Okay. So shifting gears here, I'm hoping for a lot of good questions here as well. Thor, do you want to come on camera? There you are. Great. Well, Thor, we can go to the next slide. Will, take it away from here, Thor. Make sure we can hear you. Go ahead. I can't hear you. Can you? Can others hear Thor?
No.
No. Thor, can you try talking again? Thor, do you want to try leaving and coming back? And maybe this could give everyone a chance to stretch or grab some water for a moment after all the good nuclear back and forth. So let's give Thor a moment. So how about this? We'll give Thor a minute to catch up, and let's start with Mike. Mike, can you come on camera?
Yeah, how's that?
Steve, can we hear you? We can hear you. All right, if you can, Will, can you advance 2 slides or so? The next one, right, Mike? One more?
Cut one more, I think.
There you are. Okay, let's start with you, Mike. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I'm Mike Ostrowski. I'm a senior analyst at PSE. I've been heavily involved with our RNG portfolio for the past 3 years. And I guess a good place to start talking about RNG is to define what it is. So next slide, Will. The revised Code of Washington says that renewable natural gas is a gas consisting largely of methane and other hydrocarbons derived from the decomposition of organic material in landfills, wastewater treatment facilities, and anaerobic digesters. So in contrast to conventional natural gas, which is mostly fossil-derived methane pulled out of the ground, RNG is methane released from an organic process, captured and cleaned up and used in the same way as conventional natural gas. The gas that comes off of these organic processes is generally referred to as biogas. In the case of landfills, that might be 50% methane. So this biogas has to be processed and upgraded to meet pipeline quality standards and injected into a pipeline before it's considered natural gas. Next slide. So why are we considering RNG? To start with, PSE has some pretty aggressive decarbonization goals. We've got our Beyond Net Zero Carbon Initiative, which is an aspirational goal of net zero for our gas customer sales by 2045. We've also got the Washington Climate Commitment Act, the CCA, which more or less necessitates or at least strongly incentivizes decarbonization. And there are limited options available for decarbonizing the gas system. So we're looking at all of them. Basically, either we have to electrify away our gas customers, which isn't going to happen overnight, or we have to somehow find a net zero carbon way to provide hydrocarbon fuels. We view RNG as just one part of the picture for decarbonizing, but it's a solution that's available today that has real immediate impacts on our carbon footprint. Next slide. Another reason that we're considering RNG is that as a regulated utility, we're bound to operate within the rules set forth for us by the state legislature and the UTC. In 2019, it became a legal requirement for Washington natural gas utilities to offer a voluntary RNG option to customers, which means we need to at least have some RNG supply available to provide to customers who want it. Also in 2019, the Washington legislature allowed natural gas utilities to integrate RNG into their natural gas supply more broadly. When they did that, they declared that A, renewable natural gas provides benefits to natural gas utility customers and to the public, and B, that the development of renewable natural gas resources should be encouraged to support a smooth transition to a low carbon energy economy in Washington. And the program to integrate RNG for all customers is subject to extensive requirements that are later explained in a 2020 policy statement. So hopefully that paints a picture of what's motivated us to consider RNG. On the one hand, it's an effective way to displace fossil fuels today and help us meet our decarb goals. On the other, the state of Washington has mandated that we set up a voluntary RNG program for customers who want it, as well as laying out a pathway for and endorsing the use of RNG to decarbonize the service that we provide to all customers. Next slide, Will. So talked about being variously motivated and required to pursue RNG. So that's what we've done. We've secured a number of offtake agreements from RNG projects so far to support our clean energy goals. And in 2023, we reduced the amount of fossil natural gas that we delivered to customers by about 0.7% by replacing it with RNG. This year, we expect that number to be around 3%. And that's a start. We're confident that we could continue acquiring RNG without significant capital investment. We do this using staggered long-term contracts with terms of 3 to 20 years. Next slide. Lastly, I want to touch on the future of RNG. Our goal is to continue to build our portfolio of RNG supply, and that's subject to further analysis that'll be made in the IRP and regulatory considerations. RNG fits into our decarb strategy in two ways. As I said before, it lowers our carbon impact today with minimal capital investment, which means a minimal rate base impact. Second, the RNG that we contract today will also be available to supply hard to electrify loads in the future. So 15 years from now, we'll hopefully have made big changes to the energy landscape here, but we'll still have this reasonable cost, low carbon natural gas supply to provide industrial users and other customers who aren't able to easily electrify. And last, I just quickly want to touch on supply availability of RNG. The RNG production outlook in the US is positive. Studies suggest that RNG supply will continue to increase in the future, potentially being able to supply 10 to 25% of the current US natural gas consumption. So the upshot of all this is the US is unlikely to be able to replace all of its natural gas with RNG, but I think we have the potential to replace a big chunk of it, which fits well with some of the other strategies like reducing demand and electrification. And that's all I've got on my slides.
Well, Mike, I think you got one step ahead of one of our questions from our participants here. So I'll read the question aloud, but you may have really covered it, which is how much renewable natural gas is available compared to the amount of natural gas that we consume today? How fast is the supply predicted to grow in the future? How much more does it cost today? And how might these costs decrease in the future? Anything to add to that?
I think that there are some studies from a few years back that gave rough estimates of what they thought the RNG production could be. But yeah, something in the 10 to 25% of US consumption is what I've seen. Costs, not a lot to say, I think. Hard to predict.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Let's see. We have a question here from Dale. Is there make sure we get this. Is there an identified market for RNG that could benefit in the near term during transition to other alternatives in the long term, like public transportation, buses that use biofuel, et cetera?
Sorry, could you repeat? I was trying to look at the question in the chat.
Yeah.
Is there identified market for RNG could benefit in the near term?
And Thor might answer this in a little bit too, if you want to punt it to Thor.
I think that there are markets. The transportation market has been a big consumer of RNG as well. We mostly have been focused on RNG to offset our PGA gas customer usage.
Great. I think Thor will build upon some of this. There are two other questions here that might also be answered by Thor. So how about this, Mike? Let's just see if Thor has the audio working. Let's try again. How's it going?
Test.
Brilliant. So Pete, we see your question, and let's let Thor do his thing, and we'll come back to that one. So thank you so much, Mike, and take it. And will you back up 5 slides or so to get to the original
Slide
one?
30.
There
we go.
There you are. Go ahead, Thor.
Hi, Thor Engel, mechanical engineer with PSE for quite some time. Experience with everything from small modular reactors the Navy called a submarine to hydroelectric to a variety of thermal power plants.
We can hear you. Keep going, Thor.
Okay, sorry. Anyway, so per Washington Administrative Code, right out of that WAC code for a definition of biodiesel. And if we could go to the next slide, please. Same WAC code, definition of renewable hydrocarbon diesel. So the main difference between biodiesel and hydrocarbon or renewable diesel essentially is the manufacturing process. They both utilize substantially similar feedstocks. What makes renewable diesel more attractive to us is the shelf life. Biodiesel, often referred to as B10 at your local gas station or B20, has a shelf life measured in weeks, if maybe a month at the most, whereas we tend to, in utilizing petroleum diesel as a backup fuel, we will store it, buy it at a lower price, and store it for an extensive period of time, oftentimes measured in years. So we could go to slide 32, please. Renewable diesel has a lower carbon intensity. It's not zero, but it's lower than petroleum diesel, and it meets the same ASTM standard D97057, excuse me, or 75, that our gas turbines are permitted and designed to operate on. I go to the next slide, please. So we use petroleum diesel, and we could use R99 as a backup fuel. A recent example, in January, we had the cold spell, and our gas-fired units, gas-fired generation, were curtailed from using natural gas, such that we could keep pilot lights on our customers' houses. We were able to switch to petroleum diesel and keep those generation units on, and also keep the lights on during the cold weather. So by switching to R99, we enable ourselves to keep the lights on during those cold weather periods when we're displaced with a lower carbon intensity fuel. And as it shows there in the slide, it's a 1-for-1 replacement. And in fact, you can load up your fuel tank with R99 and mix R99 and the petroleum diesel at the same time. No real issues there. R99 is available through local vendors. And as the last bullet point shows, we've tested R99 on a reciprocating diesel engine at Crystal Mountain and at a gas turbine facility in our Frederickson generating plant. In both cases, those units operated with no noticeable issues. And the emissions testing we did at the Frederickson generating plant actually came out lower than what the equivalent was on petroleum diesel. And I believe that's my last slide.
Great. Thank you, Thor. So in terms of questions in the chat, this was posed earlier, but can you expand, given the drive to reduce consumption of beef and to compost trash, won't the sources for RNG be reduced over time? Thoughts on that one?
Yeah.
That's a good, go ahead, Mike.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I think there has been a trend to try to get compostables out of landfills, but those end up somewhere and may end up in a digester that then is producing RNG itself. The beef question, it may be. I think not all beef production is being turned into RNG at this point currently. And yes, I'm not really sure about speculations on the future of beef versus RNG, but I think there's room for the RNG production to continue to grow for a little while at least.
Great, thanks, Mike. Another question on this topic is, to clarify, is renewable natural gas a one-to-one substitute for extracted natural gas? If so, is there any reduction in the emission of greenhouse gases?
The way that we currently view it, based on our sort of regulatory structure that we exist in, RNG is a one-to-one replacement. I think if you're in a vehicle fuel market, that may be different. They're tracking carbon intensities and doing some different calculations, but for our purposes, it's a one-for-one replacement with fossil natural gas.
Great. Okay. Other questions for Mike or for Thor? And if not, that'll help us get to, oh, here we go. We have a question here regarding the projection for increasing renewable natural gas supply. Is it safe to assume we'll see a similar trend in the Northwest?
Again, hard to say. I'm not a professional RNG forecaster. I think the 2018 WSU report that looked at potential sources for RNG in the Northwest, or in Washington at least, forecasted a slightly lower, something like 3 to 5% of current natural gas consumption, so lower than the nationwide average. But we also have the benefit of sort of getting on these programs earlier than some of the other areas.
Okay, I see some comments in the chat, which we'll capture as well. But in terms of another question here is, roughly speaking, at what point will PSE have to make a substantial capital investment to increase its share of RNG? Thoughts, Mike or Thor?
I think if we have the opportunity to make capital investments, but I don't believe that we're required to. We're able to secure the long-term supply by doing long-term supply contracts, which aren't capital intensive for us.
All right, I'll give it another moment or so. If not, I want to make sure we have time for public comment, because a number of you voiced some really important comments in the chat that you'll have a chance to vocalize in a moment. So, not seeing any more questions. Thank you, Mike and Thor. You can go to the next slide here. Keep going. Beautiful, next slide. Okay, so we've talked about the feedback form a few times. PSE does take everyone into account. I see them working on it. That is due March 5th. So there was a lot of good energy, no pun intended, around the nuclear conversation in particular. This is a chance for you to share some of those thoughts. On March 12th, the Resource Planning Advisory Group, which is that technical group, will be meeting to talk about resource adequacy modeling and resource needs. And those meetings, there is a public link, and it's streamed on YouTube, so you can watch those, so you can see what that body is doing to have that openness there. And then on March 25th, the Resource Planning Advisory Group is going to come back together and hear more about gas and electric resource alternatives supply side. Once again, those are open to the public to observe. And those meetings are times as well. Philip usually starts those meetings by sharing what he's heard from the public through these venues and through the feedback form. So we try to kind of create a bridge between those two bodies there. In addition, Pauline, can you just drop the email address for those who want to just use the email rather than the form? You can fit in a few more text characters that way. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, good. I wanted to have extra moments for public comment. Many of you have had a lot of thoughts in the chat here. And then PSE, if you want to just come on camera, I know that, you know, it's typical, like many public meetings, there's no back and forth dialogue, but it's good to see your faces. So Pauline, can you allow people to raise their hands, and that will get us going to the public comments. Okay, let's see the hands start coming up. Participants 3 raise hands. Very good. Okay, so far our order it will be Jim Adcock, Don Marsh, and Thomas Kramer. So Jim, I'm going to promote and allow you to talk. I'm going to share my screen if that's okay, Will, so people can just see the timer. And let's see. Let's do so many windows open, share. All right, can we hear you okay?
I don't know, can you hear me?
Jim? Yep, there we go.
Okay,
That's
yeah,
all good.
I want to continue to express my concerns. Meredith says that Puget is committed to the 2030 CETA requirements, which is that Puget be 80% clean, non-emitting then, which would mean that Puget is only generating 20% of load using fossil fuels or purchase fossil fuel power. The reason I become concerned is Puget keeps talking about these long-term future things like small nuclear reactors, but I don't see where Puget is really meeting its CEIP requirements right now. For example, back in 2021, Puget issued an RFP that was extremely well received. Puget got 2,100 megawatts of proposals, if I remember right, of which Puget accepted less than one half of 1%, and that was a 90 megawatt portion of a wind farm nameplate, which would be about 35 megawatts average power, which in turn only represents about 3% of Puget's current average generation from natural gas. So you know, that's like a 3% reduction over, roughly speaking, say a 5-year planning time frame, or that would be roughly 6% on that rate, rough glide path, roughly 6% reduction in Puget's natural gas use, fossil fuel use by 2030. So I just personally don't see where Puget is on target to actually meet the 2030 CEIP requirements, which Meredith claims Puget is going to do, but I don't see how that's going to happen. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for those comments, Jim. They've been logged here by my colleague Emily, so thank you for those notes. Don, you're up next. Let's promote you. Can you try talking?
Yeah, can you hear me?
We sure can. All right, go ahead, Don.
Yeah, so I'm confused about when the public will have a chance to weigh in on nuclear. It seemed like today was our only opportunity, and I asked during the meeting, you know, if there would be other opportunities for the public to engage. And when I mean engage, I mean like actually talk instead of just providing a comment here. And yeah, I don't understand when that's going to happen. So I would like to have some clarity on that. I'd also really like to understand what webinars are planned in the future and what topics are going to come up. So I appreciate that PSE is looking at advanced options like nuclear and these biofuels. But I don't know what else is on the plate. For example, I'm very interested in vehicle to grid. Are we going to have a public webinar on that? I'm also interested in thermal batteries and geothermal energy and time of use rates and you know, there's offshore wind. There's a whole bunch of advanced technologies which are actually, feasible today, and I don't see the big picture yet on how small modular reactors fit into that whole picture, the whole menu of options that we have. I think some of those are fairly important, and I don't know what topics are going to be in the webinars. I don't know what topics are going to be in the RPAG. And now I'm confused. The 2-minute timer is stopped, and I don't know how much time I have left. But there were a lot of questions that came up today that I wasn't able to ask, and so I'll try to get some feedback in as well. But anyway, it seemed the big picture would be very helpful for us. Thanks.
Great. Thank you for that, Don. Sorry about the timer issue. Okay, next we have Tom Kramer. Can we hear you, Tom?
Yes, can you hear me?
Sure can, yeah.
Okay, I don't think that small modular nuclear power should be considered an emerging resource. Its repeated attempts to emerge over many years have consistently failed to produce reliable, cost-effective utility scale power. A decade ago, the Union of Concerned Scientists warned that it was unlikely that small modular reactors could ever be made both sufficiently safe and cost-effective. They have not done so to date. Within the past year, what was expected to be the first commercial SMR in the US, in Utah, was canceled due to soaring cost estimates. Investing in R&D for this failed technology does not seem wise for PSE, not because there's anything evil about nuclear long-shot R&D, but because proven low-cost renewable solar and wind power, combined with storage technologies, expanded power pools, and other emerging resources, are commercially available to meet PSE's clean energy requirements. With regard to renewable natural gas, I have considerable personal experience in project development with these fuels. It is proven technology, really not an emerging resource, for waste management processes that digest organic wastes and control emissions from landfills. These sources are very limited and are mostly not appropriate for utility scale distribution, except as a supplement for fossil gas transmission and distribution systems that should ultimately be dismantled to meet our state's clean energy requirements. And I'm very skeptical of the 10 to 20% of current natural gas usage that's been projected. I think that's very optimistic. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas, for those remarks as well. I'm going to see any other. We have time for one or two more public comments. I see Virginia. I see your hand. Let's reset this. Allow to talk. Virginia, can we hear you okay?
I hope so. This is
Yeah,
Virginia.
we sure can.
Okay, this is Virginia Lohr, and I am not happy that this was listed at an IAP2 level of 1, that this was only designed for you to teach us something that we might not know and not to really receive any input from us, to not even put it at the level 2. So this whole system of how PSE is proceeding in this year and last year, I don't think has been particularly effective. I don't think you've gotten the public input that you should. I'm glad that you aren't going back to using the IAP2, but again, the level that you're choosing doesn't seem appropriate. I heard a lot of concern today about many different aspects, and I just want to say that I support what the 3 previous people have been saying about these issues and hope that PSE will actually consider some of our input. I didn't appreciate hearing that the big problem with nuclear is that the public just doesn't understand it. I agree with Tom that it's not an emerging technology. Whoops, I hope I don't run out of time here. I won't, so thank you.
Virginia, you have another 40 seconds if you want.
No, I don't want. I just want to, I think that most of the people on the call who were listening probably don't support nuclear, but I don't know because my internet wasn't working and I couldn't see. Well, actually, the way it is right now, we can't see the list of who the other people are that are listening, which we used to be able to do. And that was particularly helpful for us. It sort of seems like only PSE wants to have access to the information and not let the rest of the world know. I don't see why that should be kept secret. Thank you.
Thanks, Virginia, for those comments, and the meeting summary should have the list of who was in attendance. So next we have Dale. Let's promote and allow Dale to talk. Dale, can we hear you?
Hear me now? Hello?
Sure can, thanks. Go ahead, Dale.
Okay, yeah, thank you. First of all, yeah, just my concerns with some of the emerging technologies with CETA in the 2030. And I applaud, you know, throwing everything on the table and putting the emphasis on a lot of different options. But I think I'd like to see some more input on demand resources in some of the emergency technologies, storage, you know, whether it's, you know, water storage in the hydro systems or customer on-demand storage, community storage, battery technologies for peak demand usage, just to get us to that point, concern running up against the 2030 clock. And, you know, we're getting there and we're curtailing a lot of our peaking resources for gas-fired plants, and we're getting stuck with, you know, potential brownouts like in California. So thank you. That's it.
Thank you very much for your time. Let's stop this. And here we are, just a minute until 3 o'clock. These were intended to be more bite-sized than previous cycles, 3.5, 4-hour meetings. So we appreciate everyone's patience when we had to kind of channel some questions for written feedback. But I really want to thank all the participants who joined us today, who asked very important and technically informed questions, provided comments, and of course to the presenters from PNNL and PSE for your slides and information. Again, this will be recorded, so this is recorded. So Pauline, the last thing I'll ask you to do is just drop the YouTube link into the chat so that if people want to rewind and remember what was said, they can do so on their own time. So I'll just see that chat pop in, and that will let me know that we've reached our time together. Very good. Thanks for doing that, Pauline. Thank you all so much for your time today, and we look forward to seeing you at future PSE meetings. Take care, everyone.